To understand the Melundian mystery, we need to travel back to 1784 in the hills of eastern Tennessee. A land surveyor named John Sevier was charting the wilderness when he saw something that stopped him cold. In log cabins along the ridges lived families who didn't look like anyone he'd seen before. They had copper-toned skin, straight black hair, and features like Europeans. They spoke English with a strange accent and used words that seemed old. They said they were Portuguese, Sevier noted in his journal. But they don't look like any Portuguese I know. The families called themselves Melundians, a name whose source would confuse language experts for centuries. These mountain folk had lived in Appalachia since before the American Revolution, but nobody knew their origins. They weren't white, they weren't black, they weren't Indian. In a world that split people into three races, the Melundians didn't belong anywhere, and in early America, not belonging was dangerous. The first real disaster came in 1834 when Tennessee approved its new constitution. The law stated only free white persons could vote, own property, or speak in court. Overnight, Melundian families who had owned their mountain land for generations were suddenly labeled as free persons of color. They lost their right to vote immediately. Their kids were kicked out of public schools. Some families lost land they'd held for 50 years because they couldn't legally fight for their ownership in court. The Vardy Collins case shows how harsh this system was. Vardy was a Melundian war hero who served in the War of 1812. In 1846, a white neighbor said Vardy's 300-acre farm was his. When Vardy went to court, the judge decided that, as a person of color, Vardy couldn't speak in his own defense. He lost everything. His family had to move higher into the mountains, onto ground so bad that no white person wanted it. This happened again and again across Appalachia, as Melundian families were driven onto ridgetops where the dirt was thin and farming was almost impossible. They survived by hunting, collecting medicinal plants, and making moonshine, one of the few ways they could make money in an economy that shut them out. The isolation had a weird effect. It kept their culture and bloodlines alive, but also created genetic bottlenecks that would cause serious problems. Dr. Virginia DeMar, who spent 40 years studying Melundian family trees, found that most of today's 200,000 Melundians come from just 15 original families. These families, the Collins, Gibson, Goins, Minor, Mullins, and others, married within their group for centuries in their mountain towns. Church records from Newman's Ridge in Tennessee show the same last names appearing generation after generation. A Gibson would marry a Collins, their daughter would marry a Mullins, and their son would marry another Gibson. This wasn't by choice, it was survival. Marrying outside the group meant risking violence or legal trouble. But who were these original families? Where did they come from? For 200 years, the Melundians themselves gave different stories. Some said they descended from Portuguese sailors wrecked on the Carolina coast. Others claimed they were Turkish slaves who ran from Spanish ships. Still others said they came from the lost colony of Roanoke. White neighbors had their own ideas, most of them insulting. They called Melundians triracial isolates, saying they were a mix of runaway slaves, Indians, and white criminals. Academic researchers in the early 1900s measured Melundian skulls and called them a degraded race, unfit for civilization. But the Melundians kept saying they were different. They pointed to physical traits that didn't match any simple racial mix. Many had what scientists call the Anatolian bump, a unique knob on the back of the skull common in Mediterranean people. They had Asian-looking eyes, but European noses. Some had 6 fingers or toes, a genetic trait called polydactyly that runs in certain populations. They suffered from diseases unknown in other Appalachian communities, Mediterranean fever, Behçet's disease, and thalassemia. The mystery got deeper when linguists studied old Melundian words kept in family stories. Then came the DNA revolution. In 2002, Dr. Kevin Jones at the University of Virginia started the Melundian DNA Project. He collected samples from 120 people whose families had been called Melundian for generations. What he found shocked everyone. The Y chromosome results, passed from father to son, showed incredible variety. About 30% carried haplogroup R1b, common in Western Europe. Another 25% had haplogroup E, which started in Africa. 15% carried haplogroup J, found mainly in the Middle East. 10% had haplogroup Q, marking Native American ancestry. The remaining 20% was a mix of other lines from Central Asia, India, and the Mediterranean. This wasn't just a triracial mix. The mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to daughter, was equally varied. European haplogroups like H and U were common, but so were African haplogroups L1 and L2. Native American haplogroups A, B, C, and D showed up in about 15% of samples, but the real surprises were haplogroups M and N, typically found in South Asia and the Middle East. Dr. Jones compared these results to other American populations. No other group showed this level of variety. Even highly mixed populations like Louisiana Creoles or Brazilian Pardos had more predictable patterns. The Melundians were unique, but how did people from Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas all end up in the Appalachian Mountains? The answer came from historical detective work combined with genetic family research. Researcher Paul Heineck spent decades going through colonial records in Virginia and North Carolina. He found something remarkable. In the 1600s and early 1700s, before strict racial laws, the American colonies were more mixed than we think. Portuguese and Spanish sailors jumped ship in Virginia ports. Turkish and Arab galley slaves escaped from Mediterranean ships. Free African craftsmen worked next to European indentured servants. Native Americans traded and married with all these groups. One recorded case involves John Collins, listed in 1640s Virginia. He's noted as a Turk who married a Native American woman. Their children married into families of Portuguese sailors and free African landowners. By 1750, their descendants were established farmers in the frontier areas that would become Tennessee and Kentucky. Another family line traces to Portuguese Ishmael, who showed up in North Carolina in 1690. He married the daughter of a Native American chief and an escaped African woman. Their grandchildren married into families from Mediterranean sailors and English settlers. These weren't isolated cases. Dr. Tim Hashaw's research identified at least 50 mixed families in colonial Virginia and North Carolina who later became known as Melundian. They shared certain traits. They were free people of color who owned property. They practiced trades like blacksmithing and carpentry, and they moved to the frontier when racial laws got stricter in the coastal areas. The genetic evidence supports this colonial mixing theory. Dr. Roberta Estes, analyzing Melundian DNA in detail, found something interesting. The genetic signatures weren't recent. They dated back 300 to 400 years, exactly matching the colonial period. Even more interesting, the Middle Eastern and North African DNA showed specific patterns. It wasn't general Mediterranean. It was specifically from areas that provided galley slaves to Spanish and Portuguese ships. Coastal Algeria, Tunisia, Western Turkey, exactly where Christian Europeans would have raided for Muslim slaves who ended up in the Americas. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some Melundian families carry genetic markers that are extremely rare in modern populations. Dr. Janet Crane found that several Melundian lines carry a mitochondrial mutation that exists in only 0.01% of the world population. This mutation is found in exactly 3 places: isolated villages in northern Portugal, the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, and Melundian communities in Appalachia. This suggests that some Melundian ancestors came from very specific places and kept their genetic uniqueness through centuries of isolation. It's like finding a genetic time capsule. The discrimination Melundians faced shaped their survival methods in deep ways. They developed what sociologists call ethnic shifting, the ability to change their racial identity depending on the situation. A Melundian man might be Portuguese when applying for a marriage license, Indian when avoiding the draft, and white when trying to vote. Census records show the same families listed differently from decade to decade. The 1830 census might list them as free-colored. By 1840, they're mulatto. In 1850, they become Indian. By 1860, if they move to a new county, they might successfully pass as white. This wasn't deception, it was survival. The results of being classified as non-white were severe. In Tennessee, free people of color paid triple the taxes of whites. In Virginia, they needed special permits to own guns or dogs. In North Carolina, they couldn't testify against whites, making them easy targets for theft and violence. Education was the cruelest exclusion. Melungeon children were banned from white schools, but also unwelcome in black schools. Some communities created their own schools, but without tax support, they could rarely afford teachers or books. The illiteracy rate in Melungeon communities reached 90% by 1900. Mahala Mullins became a legend for her creative resistance. A Melungeon woman who weighed nearly 500 pounds. When sheriffs came to arrest her, they couldn't figure out how to get her down the mountain. She'd sit in her doorway, blocking the entrance, and dare them to move her. She was never successfully prosecuted. But most Melungeons weren't so lucky. Court records from the 1800s are full of sad cases. The Civil War brought hope and horror in equal measure. Melungeons found themselves caught between sides. The Confederacy tried to draft them for labor battalions, basically slave work. The Union Army was suspicious of their mixed appearance. Many Melungeon men hid in mountain caves for the entire war, coming out only at night to tend hidden gardens. Some fought for the Union, hoping victory would bring equality. Jordan Gibson from Hancock County joined the 8th Tennessee Infantry. He survived 14 battles, only to return home and find he still couldn't vote. His pension application was repeatedly denied because officials couldn't figure out his race. After the war, Reconstruction briefly offered hope. The 14th and 15th Amendments should have guaranteed Melungeon rights, but as soon as federal troops left, Southern states found new ways to exclude them. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses kept Melungeons from voting well into the 1960s. The early 1900s brought the Eugenics movement, and Melungeons became targets of racial scientists. Arthur Estabrook from the Carnegie Institution studied Melungeon families like lab specimens. His 1926 report called them a dangerous element prone to feeble-mindedness and criminality. This wasn't just academic prejudice, it had real results. Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924 defined anyone with even one drop of non-white blood as colored. Suddenly, Melungeons who had been passing as white for generations were exposed. Birth certificates were changed, marriages were cancelled, children were thrown out of white schools. Walter Plecker, Virginia's Registrar of Vital Statistics, became obsessed with tracking down Melungeons. He kept lists of suspect last names and sent spies to mountain communities. He'd examine school children for signs of mixed ancestry, checking fingernails, looking at hair texture, searching for the Melungeon bump. One heartbreaking case involved the Ramsey family of Wise County. They had successfully joined white society with children in college and businesses in town. But in 1943, someone sent Plecker an anonymous letter claiming the Ramseys were Melungeon. Plecker changed their racial classification overnight. The children were kicked out of college. The father lost his business contracts. The daughter's white fiancé broke off their engagement. The family ran to Ohio, where they changed their names and never spoke of their origins again. This pattern repeated hundreds of times. Melungeon families scattered across the country, settling in cities where no one knew their history. They became white if they could pass, black if they couldn't, Mexican in the Southwest, Italian in the Northeast, anything but Melungeon. Parents refused to tell children about their heritage. Family photos were burned, genealogical records were destroyed. A culture that had survived 200 years of mountain isolation was nearly erased in a single generation. But genes don't lie. In the 1990s, a new generation started asking questions. Why did grandmother have such unusual features? Why were we never allowed to visit certain relatives? Why did Great-Aunt Martha always insist we were Portuguese when we looked nothing like the Portuguese kids at school? The internet changed everything. Melungeon descendants who thought they were alone found others with the same stories. Websites like Melungeon Heritage Association connected thousands of people searching for their roots. Family photos were shared, stories compared, family trees rebuilt. Then came consumer DNA testing. For $99, anyone could discover their genetic ancestry. Thousands of Americans who thought they were simply white or black suddenly discovered unexpected ethnicities. Dr. Roberta Estes's analysis of modern Melundian DNA reveals the lasting impact of centuries of isolation and intermarriage. Certain genetic combinations appear only in Melundian populations. They carry specific mutations that act like genetic fingerprints, marking descent from those original colonial families. One such marker is a variation in the EDAR gene that affects hair thickness and sweat glands. It's found in only 3 populations worldwide: East Asians, Native Americans, and Melundians. But Melundians have a unique version that suggests their Asian ancestry came through a different route than typical Native Americans. Another is a mutation in the LCT gene affecting lactose tolerance. Most adults worldwide are lactose intolerant, but Europeans evolved tolerance through cattle herding. Melundians show a pattern where some family members have the European version, others the African version, and still others the Asian version. Sometimes all in the same family. Doctors in Appalachian hospitals now regularly ask about Melundian heritage when diagnosing certain conditions. The cultural rediscovery has been equally dramatic. Melundian descendants are reclaiming traditions their grandparents tried to forget. Foods kept in mountain hollows are being recognized as unique fusion cooking. Music scholars have identified Melundian influences in Appalachian folk music. Language preservation efforts have recorded hundreds of unique Melundian words and phrases. Segoglin means crooked or leaning. Jasper means stranger or outsider. These aren't just quaint dialect. They're linguistic fossils from the colonial mixing pot. Modern Melundian identity is complicated. Some embrace it fully, attending heritage festivals and joining family history groups. Others, especially older generations, still refuse to acknowledge it. The fear runs deep. Grandparents remember when being identified as Melundian meant losing everything. Young Melundians face different challenges. College applications ask for race, but what box do you check when you're genetically everything? Some identify as multiracial, others choose based on appearance or family tradition. A few write Melundian in the other category, reclaiming an identity their ancestors were forced to hide. The legal issues continue today. In 2020, a Virginia court case focused on whether Melundians qualified for minority business contracts. The judge ruled they didn't fit any existing category, too mixed to be a single minority, too historically oppressed to be considered white. It's the same legal limbo their ancestors faced, just in modern form. If this story of genetic mystery and cultural survival grabbed your attention, please like this video and share it with others who might have their own hidden heritage waiting to be found. Do you have mysterious family stories or unexpected DNA results? Share what you know in the comments below. Remember, we all carry history in our genes. The only question is whether we're brave enough to learn what it really tells us about who we are and where we come from. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching,